The solicitor's voice was a dry rasp of paper and panic. A settlement. Your Grace, it is the only sensible path. Lady Beatrice is not concerned with the truth. She is concerned with victory. We offer her a generous increase to her annuity. We make this go away quietly. A Lord Maxwell, the estate steward, a man whose face seemed carved from the very granite of the house, shook his head, his jowls trembling with indignation. Unreward this slander. Never. We fight. We challenge the jurisdiction. We question the witnesses. We bury them in paperwork until she chokes on the expense. The Duke of Blackwood said nothing. He stood by the great mullioned window of his study, a silhouette against the bruised purple of a winter twilight. The room was cold, the fire in the hearth having dwindled to a sullen orange pulse that offered no real warmth. He had not moved for the better part of an hour, a figure of such stillness he might have been a statue, dedicated to grief. Before him on the polished expanse of his desk lay the document, a crisp legal petition that felt heavier, more malevolent than any cannonball. It sought to declare him an unfit guardian, and to remove his daughter, his only child, from his care. From her chair near the door, where she had been placed, as if an afterthought, Eleanor Vance watched the three men. She had remained silent, her hands folded in the lap of her plain gray dress. Her very presence in this room, a breach of every conceivable protocol. She was the governess. She was the subject of the petitioner's most vicious language. She was, according to the document's careful phrasing, the annucio influence of low and compromised character who proved the Duca's dereliction of duty. The two men continued to argue, their voices circling the Duca's silence like agitated crows. Finally, Alistair turned from the window. His face was pale, drawn, the shadows beneath his eyes stark in the fading light. He looked past his solicitor, past his steward, his gaze settling on her. The room fell instantly quiet, the men's arguments dying in their throats at the unexpected shift in their master's attention. Miss Vance," the Duke said, his voice low and devoid of inflection. It was not a question, but a command for attention. You have heard their counsel. What is your opinion?" The solicitor's mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping for air. The steward stared, his stony composure cracking with disbelief. They had been debating matters of law, of finance, of strategy, the purview of men. And the Duke, the cold, unreadable, powerful Duke of Blackwood, had just asked the opinion of the governess, the very woman whose presence had ignited the firestorm. And here is the thing you must understand, child. A question like that, in a room like that, is never just a question. It is a verdict. It is the culmination of 1,000 quiet moments, of things noticed and unsaid, of a judgment passed and then, piece by piece, dismantled. To understand the weight of that question, you must first understand the crushing weight of the silence that had preceded it. A silence that had begun for Eleanor 6 months earlier, with a handful of words spoken in carelessness, that had landed with the force of a final damning judgment. 6 months before, Eleanor Vance had been living in a state of meticulously managed decline. Her world was a small room at the back of her aunt's London townhouse, a room that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and damp wool. Her father, a man of brilliant intellect and disastrously innocent faith in his fellow man, had been a respected classical scholar before a single ruinous investment had wiped away their name, their fortune, and his will to live. He had left her with nothing but a crate of books, a profound understanding of Greek tragedy, and a name that now caused doors to be quietly closed. Guilty of what? Guilty of being his daughter. She was a poor relation, taken in out of a charity that was mentioned at every meal. Her days were a litany of small humiliations, delivered with the placid smile of her Aunt Augusta. She read aloud until her throat was raw, wrote letters in her elegant hand for hours, and endured Augusta's friends, women who looked at her with a pity so sharp it was indistinguishable from contempt. She was useful. It was the word that had come to define her. Useful, like a sturdy pair of shoes or a good coal scuttle. Necessary, but never wanted. One dreary Tuesday, a letter had arrived bearing a ducal crest. It was a summons, stark and impersonal, from the Duke of Blackwood's solicitor. Her aunt had been scandalized and thrilled in equal measure. A Blackwood, shade breathed, her hand fluttering at her throat. Whatever could he want with you? Eleanor had no idea. She knew of the Duke only by reputation. A remote, powerful man who had buried his wife a year prior and had since retreated into a formidable solitude at his country estate, Harrowmere. A man, it was whispered, frozen solid by grief. She presented herself at the solicitor's office in her best dress, which was her only dress, mended at the cuff and gray as a November sky. The solicitor, Mr. Finch, was a man made of dust and documents. He explained the situation with clinical precision. The Duke's daughter, Lady Rosamond, age 7, had fallen into a deep and troubling silence since her mother's death. She did not speak. She did not play. She merely existed. A small, pale ghost haunting the vast corridors of Harrowmere. A succession of governesses had been employed. All had failed. All had fled, defeated by the childish, impenetrable wall of silence. His Grace has been made aware of your particular circumstances, Finch had said, peering at her over his spectacles. He meant her father's disgrace. He meant her poverty, and your reputation for a certain placid temperament. He meant her ability to endure humiliation without complaint. He requires someone who will not be easily discouraged. The position is offered to you. It was not a lifeline, it was a plank of wood thrown into a stormy sea. But a plank was better than nothing. She had accepted, the arrangements were made. She was to travel to Harrowmere in a week. It was 2 days before her departure that the words were spoken. Her aunt had insisted on a final, excruciating tea with Lady Beatrice Finchley, the late Tachia's sister, and a woman of formidable social standing. Beatrice was beautiful, impeccably dressed, and possessed a voice as sweet and cloying as poisoned honey. She had taken up residence at Harrowmere for extended periods since her sister's death, ostensibly to comfort her niece, but in reality to solidify her own importance. Eleanor was serving the tea, a role she had long ago accepted, when Beatrice, believing her out of earshot, had turned to Augusta. "A Blackwood is truly lost, isn't he?" she had murmured, her voice carrying perfectly in the still air of the parlor. "A hiring this one. Vance. The daughter of that bankrupt fool. Honestly, what is he thinking? She has no connections, no grace, no understanding of our world." Augusta had made a small placating noise. I confronted Alistair about it. "Of course," Beatrice continued, a note of satisfaction in her tone. Told him it was an insult to Isabella's memory. Do you know what he said?" She had paused for effect. He was utterly cold. He said, "I am aware. She is not the kind of woman I could respect. She is merely unnecessary." She is not the kind of woman I could respect. The teacup in Eleanor's hand did not tremble. Her expression did not change. She had spent years perfecting the art of a placid exterior. Inside, something brittle and essential, shattered. It was not the insult itself. She was accustomed to insults. It was the confirmation of what she had long suspected to be the truth of her existence. She was a tool to be used, a solution to a problem. A necessary object, devoid of any intrinsic worth. The Duke had not seen a person. He had seen a function, and he had judged her, sight unseen, based on the name her father had accidentally destroyed. The words became a part of her. They were a cold stone in her gut, a bitter taste in her mouth. They echoed in the rattling of the carriage wheels that took her away from London, and in the sighing of the wind through the ancient oaks that lined the drive to Harrowmere. Harrowmere was magnificent and profoundly sad. It was a grand house that seemed to be holding its breath, every curtain drawn, every surface gleaming but lifeless. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of winter light, as if they were the only living things in the vast, cold halls. The staff were polite, watchful, and clearly skeptical. They had seen governesses come and go. They expected her to be no different. Her first formal meeting with the Duke took place in the same study where, 6 months later, he would ask her opinion. He was taller than she had expected, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He did not ask her to sit. He stood behind his desk, a fortress of mahogany and authority. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice as cold and formal as the room. Your duties are simple. You are to care for my daughter. You will see to her lessons, her meals, her well-being. You will attempt to engage her. Do you have any questions?" The echoing words, "not the kind of woman I could respect," screamed in her mind. It would have been so easy to be meek, to curtsy and whisper, "No, your grace," and scurry away to the nursery, but the words had done something else, too. They had burned away the last of her fear. When you are told you have no value, there is a strange, cold freedom in it. You have nothing left to lose. She met his gaze directly. "I do, your grace," she said, her own voice quiet but perfectly steady. He raised a single surprised eyebrow. Before I begin," she said, "I have terms." A muscle tightened in his jaw. The Duke of Blackwood was not a man accustomed to hearing terms from anyone, least of all a disgraced governess. First," she said, counting the points off on her gloved fingers. I am to have full and sole authority in the nursery. My methods are not to be questioned or countermanded by any other member of this household." She meant Lady Beatrice. He knew it. A second. "I will require a full account of what the physicians have said, what the previous governesses have attempted, and what you yourself have observed of your daughter's condition. I do not work with half a story." He was silent, his eyes narrowed, studying her as if she were a new and baffling species. "Third," she finished, her voice softening, just a fraction. The memory of the late Duchess is not to be a forbidden topic. If this child is to heal, she must be allowed to grieve. Her mother cannot be a ghost we all pretend not to see. Her name will be spoken with respect and with love. If that is not acceptable, then I am the wrong person for this post." She stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her posture unwavering. She had laid her cards on the table. She had demanded to be treated not as a necessary object, but as a professional with her own mind. She fully expected to be dismissed on the spot. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grand clock on the mantelpiece. Alistair looked at her, and for the first time he truly saw her. He had been prepared for desperation, for fawning gratitude, for a woman beaten into submission by her circumstances. He was not prepared for this quiet, unbending dignity. He had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and had discharged both badly. He saw in her a strange kind of solvency. He did not possess himself. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Your terms are acceptable, Miss Vance." He did not know it then, but in that moment the first crack appeared in his careless, cruel judgment. A woman for whom he could have no respect had just commanded his. The nursery at Harrowmere was a beautiful prison. It had the finest toys, the most handsome furniture, all of it untouched, all of it covered in a thin, invisible film of sorrow. And at its center was Lady Rosamond, a small porcelain doll of a child, with her father's dark hair and her mother's wide, haunted blue eyes. She sat in a window seat, clutching a small, tarnished silver locket in her hand, and looked straight through Eleanor as if she were made of glass. The first week was a study in silence. Eleanor did not push. She did not cajole or bribe or demand. The governesses before her had tried everything: bright cheerfulness, stern discipline, tearful pleading. Eleanor simply existed in the space with the child. She brought her needlework and sat in a chair by the fire. She opened the heavy velvet curtains each morning, saying softly, Let us let the light in, shall we? She read aloud, not from children's books, but from poetry, from tales of Greek mythology her father had loved, her voice a low, steady murmur that asked for nothing in return. Lady Beatrice was a constant, corrosive presence. She would sweep into the nursery, all rustling silk and sharp perfume, and offer critiques disguised as suggestions. My dearest Isabella would never have allowed the curtains to be drawn. The sun fades, the tapestries, you see, as she would say, her smile never reaching her eyes. Or, are you quite sure? Greek myths are suitable for a child of her delicate sensibilities. So, mucha unpleasantness. Eleanor would simply meet her gaze and say, "A thank you for your concern, Lady Beatrice. The Duke has given me authority in this room, and she would not give an inch." Beatrice would depart in a cloud of frustrated fury, leaving the scent of lilies and malice in her wake. Eleanor knew the woman was reporting every perceived transgression to the Duke. She waited for the summons, for the dismissal. It never came. Alistair, for his part, was a distant, watchful presence. He would appear at the nursery door in the evenings, a tall shadow, and ask for a report. Eleanor would give him a simple, factual account of the day a Lady Rosamond ate her broth. She looked at a picture of a ship for 5 minutes. She did not speak. He would nod, his face unreadable. Carry on, Miss Vance. He noticed things, though. He noticed that the perpetual chill in the nursery had been replaced by the warmth of a well-tended fire. He noticed that the room, which had smelled of dust and disuse, now smelled faintly of the lemon polish Eleanor used on the furniture. He noticed one evening that she was humming a quiet tune as she mended one of Rosamond's stockings, a simple, searching melody. He did not recognize it, but it was the first music the house had heard in a year. The breakthrough, when it came, was so small it was almost imperceptible. 2 weeks into her tenure, Eleanor was sitting in her usual chair, polishing a small, silver-rimmed pair of spectacles. They had been her father's. They were all she had left of his physical presence, and she cared for them as if they were priceless jewels. Rosamond, who had been staring out the window, slid from her perch. She crossed the room on silent feet and stood before Eleanor. For a long moment, she just watched the gentle circular motion of the polishing cloth. Then, she held out her own small clenched fist. Slowly, she opened it. On her palm lay the tarnished silver locket. The clasp was broken. Her lips parted. A tiny, rusty whisper of a voice emerged. "Can you?" Eleanor's heart stopped. She looked from the child's desperate, hopeful eyes to the broken object in her hand. She gave a small, slow nod. "I believe so," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. She took the locket with infinite care. We will fix it together." That evening, when the Duke came for his report, Eleanor's was different. Lady Rosamond ate her broth," she said, her voice calm. And she spoke. Aya. Something flickered in Alice Tyra's Aya. Flare of hope so fierce, it was almost pain. He did not ask what she had said. He simply looked at his daughter, who was sitting by the fire, watching Eleanor work on the tiny, broken clasp with a pair of tweezers from her sewing box. And for the first time he saw, not a vacant doll, but a child, waiting for something precious to be returned to her. He looked at Eleanor, not as a governess, but as the architect of this small, fragile miracle. He began to find reasons to be in the nursery. He would bring a book and sit in the corner, pretending to read. But Eleanor knew he was watching, listening. He heard her tell Rosamond stories about the locket's previous owner. Your mother loved this locket very much," Eleanor said one afternoon as they finally repaired the clasp. Maid told me she received it from your grandmother. She said your mother was a wonderful horsewoman and that she once won a race wearing this very locket." Rosamunda's eyes, which had been fixed on the locket, lifted to Eleanor's face. A real, genuine spark of interest was there. The stories were not sad. They were vibrant, alive. Eleanor was not erasing the Duchess. She was carefully, lovingly piecing her back together for her daughter. Alistair felt a pang of something he could only identify as shame. He had packed away all of Isabella's things, banished her portraits to the attic, silenced her name, believing he was protecting his daughter from the pain of her memory. He saw now that he had only been protecting himself. He had been starving his daughter of the very thing she needed most. This quiet woman, this daughter of a ruined man, understood his Seldas heart better than he did. The thaw continued. Rosamond began to speak in short, hesitant sentences. She pointed to a bird in the garden. She asked for a story. One night, as Eleanor tucked her into bed, the child whispered, will you sing?" Eleanor's mind went to the tune the Duke had overheard. It was a simple lullaby her own mother used to sing. She began to hum it, then to sing the words softly. Rosamunda's eyes drifted shut, a faint, peaceful smile on her lips. Alistair stood in the darkened hallway, listening. He recognized the tune now. It was one Isabella had loved, one she had tried to sing to Rosamond as a baby. He had forgotten it completely. Eleanor had somehow found it, and given it back to them. He leaned his head against the cold wall, a wave of gratitude so profound it felt like a physical blow washing over him. The respect he had so carelessly denied her was no longer a question. It was a fact. As solid and real as the floor beneath his feet. He had hired a governess. He had found he wasn't sure what he had found, but it was essential. The house was breathing again. But a house that starts to breathe again is noticed by those who preferred it suffocated. Lady Beatrice saw the changes, and her pleasant facade began to crack and peel. She saw Rosamond holding Eleanor's hand in the garden. She heard the faint sound of the child's laughter drifting from an open window. She saw the Duke speaking with Miss Vance in the hallway, his expression not cold and distant, but engaged, attentive. She saw her influence, her position as the proxy duchess and keeper of her sister's sacred memory, dissolving before her very eyes. And so, she acted. She had a long, private conversation with the Duke, her voice full of feigned concern. "Alistair, darling, I am so worried," Shade said, dabbing at a perfectly dry eye with a lace handkerchief. The child is becoming attached to a servant, a woman of no standing. What will people say? It reflects so poorly on you, on Isabella's memory. People will think you are being manipulated. Alistair, for the first time, had not placated her. Elena has done more for Rosamond in 2 months than we have managed in a year, he said, his voice clipped. Her standing is of no concern to me. Her character is Beatrice's eyes had narrowed. His defense of the governess was more passionate than she had ever heard him be about anyone, including his late wife. This was no longer about the child, it was a threat to her own ambitions. If Alistair were to develop feelings for this grey mouse, her future as the influential sister-in-law, perhaps even a future as the next Duchess herself, was over. A week later, Mr. Finch arrived from London, his face grim, and delivered the petition. Lady Beatrice had struck, using Alistair's own careless words, twisted and magnified, as her primary weapon. She was petitioning the court for guardianship of her niece, citing the Duke's neglect and the appointment of an unstable and morally compromised governess from a disgraced family. The house that had just begun to breathe was plunged back into the cold, which brought them back to the study, to the twilight, and to the Duke's impossible question, Miss Vance, what is your opinion? Eleanor took a slow breath, the silence in the room stretching thin. The solicitor and the steward stared at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and disdain. What could she possibly have to say? She looked directly at the Duke. He was not testing her. He was genuinely asking. In his eyes, she saw not the cold, arrogant peer, but a desperate father, terrified of losing his child. My opinion, Your Grace," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet room, "is that both of these men are wrong," the solicitor sputtered. The stewardess face darkened. "You cannot buy the truth, Mr. Finch," she said, turning her calm gaze on him. A settlement would be an admission of guilt. It would prove Lady Beatrice's every lie. She then looked at the steward. And you cannot defeat a deeply personal accusation with impersonal procedure, Lord Maxwell. This is not about jurisdiction. This is about a child's welfare. She rose from her chair and walked towards the Duca's desk. She did not look at the petition, but at the man. A Lady Beatrice's claim is built on 2 pillars, she said. That I am a person of low character, and that you are a father who does not care. Both are falsehoods. The only way to fight a lie is with the truth. Spoken plainly, spoken publicly. Go to the hearing, she urged, her voice low but intense. Do not hide, do not bargain. Stand before the magistrate and speak the truth of what has happened in this house these past few months. Let them question me. I have nothing to hide. My father's only crime was being too trusting. If that is a stain upon my character, then I will bear it. She paused, then added the most crucial part. And Rosamunda, if the magistrate will permit it, she should be heard. Not questioned, like a criminal, but allowed to speak. Her voice is the only one that truly matters in all of this. A long silence followed. The Duke searched her face, his expression unreadable. She had offered no easy solution, no clever trick. She had offered only the simple, terrifying weapon of honesty. Men do not always care to be seen, but in that moment, she saw all the way to the core of him. A man, trapped by his own armor. He finally broke the silence. Mr. Finch, he said, his voice ringing with a new and final authority. You will refuse any and all offers of a settlement. You will inform Lady Beatrice's solicitors that we will see them at the hearing. He turned to Eleanor and a look of profound, weary respect was plain on his face. We will do as Miss Vance suggests. We will tell the truth. The day of the hearing was cold and gray, the sky a lid of iron over the courthouse. The room was small and paneled in dark wood, smelling of old leather and anxiety. It was not a public trial, but a private hearing before a senior family magistrate. Still, it felt like the whole world was watching. Lady Beatrice sat opposite them, a vision in deep mourning purple, her expression one of pious sorrow. She looked every bit the concerned aunt, desperate to save her niece from a terrible fate. Her solicitor was smooth and venomous. He painted a picture of a duke, lost in his own grief, neglecting his duties, falling under the sway of a cunning and manipulative young woman from a family of known cheats and failures. He called a parlor-maid, her eyes darting nervously towards Beatrice, who testified that Miss Vance kept odd hours and filled the child's head with morbid stories about her dead mother. It was a masterful performance of lies woven with half-truths. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her hands in her lap, feeling the weight of every stare. The old words echoed, "Not the kind of woman I could respect." Beatrice was attempting to make that judgment a legal fact. When it was Eleanor's turn to be questioned, she walked to the stand with a calm she did not feel. Beatrice's solicitors circled her like a shark. "And Miss Vance, is it not true that your father, the late Mr. Edward Vance, died in a state of disgrace, having lost his entire fortune and that of his investors in a fraudulent scheme?" "And my father died of a broken heart," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "His mistake was one of judgment, not of character. He never recovered from the shame of having failed others. A shame you now carry. Is it not true you were living on the charity of your aunt before the Duke hired you?" "It is true I had no fortune of my own. And you saw in this position an opportunity, did you not? A wealthy, grieving Duke, a vulnerable child, a chance to elevate your station?" Eleanor met his condescending gaze without flinching. "I saw a little girl who was drowning in silence, sir. I offered her my hand. That is all." He shifted his attack. You have been heard discussing the late Duchess with the child. Is it your belief that constantly reminding a grieving child of her loss is a healthy practice?" "It is my belief," Eleanor said, her voice ringing with a sudden passion. That pretending a person you loved never existed is a cruelty beyond measure. A memory is not a wound, sir, it is a treasure. I am not reminding Lady Rosamond of her loss. I am helping her remember her mother's love. She was dismissed. She had spoken her truth. She did not know if it was enough. Then the Duke was called. Alistair took the stand, his presence filling the small room. He looked not at Beatrice, not at the magistrate, but for a brief, steadying moment, at Eleanor. The solicitor went for the kill. Your Grace. Is it not a fact that you, yourself, hold no respect for Miss Vance's character? Is it not true that you told a member of your own family, she is not the kind of woman I could respect a hush fell over the room. This was the heart of the matter. Beatrice smiled, a small triumphant twitch of her lips. She had him trapped. If he denied it, she was a witness who could say he lied. If he admitted it, his judgment was flawed, and his case was lost. Alistair looked at the magistrate, his face grave. I said those words, he admitted, his voice low and clear. The solicitor's smile widened. And, the Duke continued, his voice rising with a cold, clear anger that made the air crackle, I have never in my life been more profoundly wrong, or more deeply ashamed of my own arrogance and blindness. He turned his gaze fully on Eleanor, speaking to her as much as to the court. Those words were spoken by a man who valued station over substance, reputation over reality. A man who was so encased in his own grief, he could not see the truth in front of him. In the months she has been in my home, Miss Vance has shown more integrity, more courage, and more quiet strength than any person I have ever had the honor to know. She did not remind my daughter of her loss. She gave my daughter her mother back. She did not fill my house with morbidity. She filled it with light. She is the heart of my household. And she has my complete, my profound, and my unwavering respect. The solicitor's face had gone slack with shock. Beatrice's face was a mask of fury. The magistrate, a shrewd-looking man with weary eyes, seemed deeply moved. He cleared his throat. Your Grace. The court appreciates your candor. I believe I have heard enough. Please, sir. A small voice cut through the room. Everyone turned. Rosamond, who had been sitting quietly beside a court bailiff, had stood up. She was holding her polished silver locket in her hand. Please, may I speak? The magistrate looked at Alistair, who nodded his permission. Rosamond walked, not to her father, but straight to Eleanor. She slipped her small hand into Eleanor's and faced the magistrate, her chin held high. Miss Eleanor fix my mother's locket, she said, her voice small but carrying to every corner of the room. Aunt Beatrice told me to put it away, that it would make me sad. Miss Eleanor told me stories about Mama wearing it. She said we should always remember the people we love. She squeezed Eleanor's hand. I was quiet because I was afraid I would forget my mother's voice. Miss Eleanor sings her song so I can remember. I want to stay with Papa, she said, her gaze firm. And, with her, it was over. A child's simple, honest words had done what no lawyer could. They had dismantled a fortress of lies with the plain truth. The magistrate dismissed the petition with a curt final wave of his hand. Lady Beatrice sat frozen for a moment, her public humiliation complete, before sweeping from the room, without a backward glance. The silence she left behind was not one of grief, but of peace. That night, a fragile quiet settled over Harrowmere. The fires burned brightly in the hearths. The staff moved with a new lightness in their steps. The battle had been won. Eleanor stood by the window in the library, watching the first hesitant stars appear in the ink-dark sky. She felt a profound sense of exhaustion and a deeper sense of release. She had survived. They had survived. She heard footsteps and turned. The Duke stood in the doorway, watching her. He had dismissed the last of the solicitors an hour ago. Now, they were alone. He walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. The air between them was charged with all the things that had been said, and all the things that had not. Eleanor, he said, It was the first time he had used her given name. It sounded unfamiliar, yet perfectly right. What I said today in that room, you spoke the truth. Alastair, she said softly. As I advised. No? He shook his head. The rest, I did not have the courage for. He took a step closer. The failing was never your father's. It was mine. I was a coward. I was so trapped in my guilt over Isabella for the trips I did not cancel, for the words I did not say, that I sealed this house like a tomb. I judged you by the world's standards, because it was easier than admitting my own had failed so completely. His face was stripped bare of all its ducal armor. She saw only a man, one who had been profoundly lonely for a very long time. When you walked into my study that first day, he went on, his voice raw with emotion. You set your terms. I thought I was hiring a governess. I realize now I was being offered a rescue. You didn't just teach my daughter how to speak again. You taught me how to live again. He was standing before her now, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I need you to stay, Eleanor. Not as a governess. Not for Rosamondista. He paused, his gaze searching hers. A stay for me. The words she had longed to hear, had not dared to even imagine, hung in the air. But the habits of a lifetime, of being merely useful, died hard. Do not say that if it is only gratitude. Your Grace, she whispered, her voice trembling. I could not bear it. Alistair, he corrected her gently. He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb stroking her cheek. A gratitude is a debt to be paid. This is not a debt. His eyes, the color of the sea, were filled with a light she had never seen there before. This is a homecoming. And then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound tenderness. It was a kiss that spoke of respect, earned, of a home found, of a silence finally and irrevocably broken. In his arms, Eleanor Vance, the daughter of a disgraced man, the woman who was merely necessary, finally understood what it was to be chosen. 6 months later, spring arrived at Harrowmere, not as a hesitant visitor, but as a joyful resident. The curtains were thrown open to the sun, and the sound of a child's laughter was a common music in the halls. The late Duchess portrait was brought down from the attic and hung in its place of honor in the gallery. But now, on the table beneath it, there was always a vase of fresh flowers, placed there by Eleanor and Rosamond. The memory was no longer a ghost, but a gentle, welcome presence. One bright afternoon, Alistair found Eleanor in the garden, sitting on a stone bench, carefully polishing her fedora spectacles. He came up behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. Still, making sure you see the world clearly, he murmured against her hair. She smiled, leaning back against him. More clearly than ever, she said. Just then, Rosamond came racing across the lawn, her cheeks pink, her hair flying behind her. She threw her arms around Eleanor's neck in a fierce hug. They're blooming, she squealed, pointing towards the rose garden. Mama's favorite ones. They're finally blooming. The word, which had been tentative at first, was now easy, natural, a title earned, not by birth or by contract, but by love. That evening, as Alistair and Eleanor stood watching Rosamond sleep, her silver locket rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of her breath, he took her hand. She called you that from the first night. You know, he said quietly, after the hearing. She came to my room and said, good night, Papa. Then she paused at the door and whispered, and please tell Mama good night too. Eleanor felt tears well in her eyes. She had come to Harrowmere as a necessary object, a woman he could not respect. She had endured the coldness of the house and the cruelty of the world. She had not replaced the Duchess, who was loved and lost. She had done something far harder and far more beautiful. She had become the woman who stayed, and she was home. What do you think is harder to overcome, a public insult or a private doubt? Let us know in the comments below where you're listening from in the world. We love hearing from you. And if you enjoyed this story of love and respect found in the most unexpected of places, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more tales that warm the heart. We have a new story waiting for you tomorrow, and we cannot wait to share it. Until then, take care.